Hey everyone, I'm back. You remember last time I talked about my 10 most valuable baseball cards, and this time I want to talk about my 10 most favorite baseball cards. Well, at least that's what it started out to be, but I got sidetracked by so many things that I remember about baseball in the 1950s. I am going to talk about some of my favorite cards, but I'm also going to talk about some of the things I remember about baseball in the 1950s. You guys should remember that prior to 1958, when the Dodgers came to town, there was no Major League Baseball in California. There was, however, professional baseball. There was the Pacific Coast League, the PCL. It was the top minor league in the country. In fact, for a long time, the PCL really wanted to become one of the major leagues so that there would be an American League, a National League, and the Pacific Coast League. Believe me, the Pacific Coast League had a lot of great players. Some who made it big in the majors, some who really didn't, but still had great minor league careers here in Southern California. You're going to see pretty quickly how I get sidetracked into talking about the Pacific Coast League and the players there. I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about the great rivalry between two PCL clubs, both located in Los Angeles. One was the Hollywood Stars, and the other was the PCL Los Angeles Angels. I'm going to talk a little bit about their parks, too. The Los Angeles Angels had Wrigley Field, located very near downtown Los Angeles, whereas the Hollywood Stars had Gilmore Field, which is located, I'd say only about 15 minutes away from Wrigley. They were great rivals. They had some great games, a lot of fights, some terrific players. I'm going to talk about two of my most favorite players and show you their cards. Two guys, one from the Hollywood Stars and the other from the Los Angeles Angels. So I did obviously get sidetracked here, and I'm just going to have to do another video about my favorite players because I just don't have enough time here. This has been great fun for me, very nostalgic, remembering a lot of things from my childhood. So with that, let's get started with the very first baseball card. This guy, well, I'll show him to you in a minute coming up.
Hey, bada, swing, bada. Hey, bada, so.
Yeah, this was one of our favorite cards to collect. We love this guy. Even though he wasn't much of a player, he did play 12 years in the majors starting in 1950 at the age of 17. He couldn't hit for beans, but it was a good defensive catcher. During his entire lifetime, he had an average of only .233. He played on a lot of different clubs, got traded a lot. Pretty much a utility backup catcher, never played that much, but good enough to hang around for 12 years in the majors. So, you say, why was he one of our favorite baseball cards? He was never an all-star. He never led the league in anything. Well, let me ask you this, boys. How do you pronounce his name? What? Well, I'll tell you how to pronounce it. Harry Chiti. Harry Chiti. But back then, we were kids. How did we pronounce his name? You know, this was Harry Shitty. Harry Shitty. are one of our favorite baseball cards. We tried to get as many as we could. We'd go to our friends and ask them, hey, you got any shitty cards? And they'd say, what? And we say, yeah, Harry Shitty. Don't you know him? But guys, before we leave Harry Shitty, I have to tell you, there is one thing he is famous for. He was the first player ever to be traded for himself. Yes, he got traded for himself. How did that happen, you may ask? Well, back in the 50s and even today, when you make a trade, sometimes you do it for cash and a player to be named later. This means the other team can pick who they want to give you for the player that was traded. So, in 1962, the Cleveland Indians traded Harry Shitty to the New York Mets for $100,000 and a player to be designated later. Usually, under these circumstances, the Mets had 60 days to pick a player from their roster to give to the Indians in exchange for Harry. 2 months later, the Mets had been playing Harry, but he wasn't doing very good, so the player designated later in exchange for Harry was Harry. And that's how Harry Shitty got traded for himself. Hey, next up is another guy you've never heard of. Forrest Vandergrift Jacobs. What kind of parent would name their kid Forrest Vandergrift? I don't know, but he never went by that name in baseball ever, because when he played, he was Spook. That's right, that's who I'm talking about. Spook Jacobs. Spook played only 2.5 years in the majors. He was a very mediocre player, couldn't hit much at all. He had a .247 lifetime average, but he was fast and a pretty good fielder. Nevertheless, 2.5 years, that was it for Spook. However, he played 17 years in the minors. In 1956, he was sent down from the Kansas City Athletics to the Hollywood Stars of the PCL. Now, I don't mean to demean Spook as a player, because believe me, at that time, there were only 8 teams in the league, and you had to be very good to even make the majors ever. A lot of guys played their entire career in the minors. So Spook went to the Hollywood Stars in 1956. There were 8 teams in the Pacific Coast League, the PCL, including the Los Angeles Angels, Seattle Rainiers, Portland Beavers, Hollywood Stars, Sacramento Solons, San Francisco Seals, Vancouver Mounties, and yes, the San Diego Padres. They were the best minor league in the country, and in fact, they spent a lot of time lobbying to become a major league. So you would have the American League, the National League, and the Pacific Coast League. They were never successful, obviously, but they had some great players in the Pacific Coast League. One of those players was none other than the great Ted Williams, considered by many to be the greatest hitter of all time. Ted, of course, was born and raised in San Diego, went to high school in San Diego, and actually started playing for the Padres when he was in high school. He played for the Padres only a couple of years, did extremely well. In fact, he took them to the PCL championship one year, but he didn't stay too long. Why? Because he was a great player, and the Boston Red Sox had already signed him, and they wanted him up on the team. The other great player to come out of the PCL was Joe DiMaggio, who played for the San Francisco Seals for 2 years before he was brought up by the New York Yankees to play center field, where he proceeded to hit in 56 consecutive games, still a record today, Joe DiMaggio. There were many others, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about some of them later. Called Wrigley's $1 Million Palace, Wrigley Field was built in South Los Angeles in 1925 and was, of course, named after William Wrigley Jr., the chewing gum magnate. Wrigley also owned the original Los Angeles Angels, a Pacific Coast League team, and also their parent club, the Major League Chicago Cubs. Wrigley's Major League team in Wrigley Field in North Chicago wasn't named Wrigley Field until 1926, whereas the Los Angeles Angels Wrigley Field was Wrigley Field in 1925. So the first Wrigley Field was in Los Angeles, not in Chicago. Wrigley Field was built to resemble a Spanish-style architecture, and it was a somewhat scaled-down version of Chicago's ballpark, which was then known as Cubs Park. And they looked very similar, and they both eventually, of course, were to bear Wrigley's name. Wrigley also owned Catalina Island, where the Chicago Cubs went for spring practice. So it was for 33 seasons, from 1925 to 1957, that this park, Wrigley Field in Los Angeles, was home to the Angels, who were a farm team for the Chicago Cubs. However, in 1957, the Dodgers bought Wrigley Field in Los Angeles, plus the Angels franchise and their territorial rights, and a minor league club in Fort Worth, Texas, for $3 million. So, Los Angeles Wrigley's days as a minor league baseball facility were over. The Dodgers were coming, and they did, of course, in 1958. The Pacific Coast League Angels franchise was forced to relocate, ending up in Spokane, Washington, as the Indians. Now, remember that the Dodgers bought all of this for $3 million. It was only 4 years later that they sold only the brand name Angels to Gene Autry for $3.5 million. So they made quite a good deal. So the Major League did use Wrigley Field in 1961. It was the new Major League Los Angeles Angels. They only used it for a year. After that, they used the new Dodger Stadium in 1962 and then their own stadium in Anaheim. The use of Wrigley as a Major League stadium was in fact investigated by the Dodgers. They were thinking about expanding it. They also thought about the Rose Bowl and, of course, the LA Coliseum. The Dodgers opted for seating capacity over real suitability as a baseball field, given the fact that Wrigley could only hold 22,000. The Los Angeles Coliseum could hold 93,000 plus. So, of course, that's what they went with. After the Angels moved out, the Major League Angels, in 1961, Wrigley Field was used for civic purposes, some concerts and stuff like that, some soccer events. Eventually, 1969, it was torn down. Okay, guys, I'm going to talk just a little bit about Gilmore Field, which is where the Hollywood Stars played. Gilmore Field was built in 1926. It certainly was not the beautiful little jewel box that Wrigley Field in Los Angeles was, but it nevertheless was a very playable field and attracted a lot of attention. Stars were attracted along with other celebrities just to be seen at the park, much like Dodger Stadium is kind of today. It was became a popular gathering place for a lot of Hollywood celebrities. In 1938, the Hollywood Stars were purchased by a guy named Bob Cobb, who is famous for another reason, which I'll quickly show you. But let's take a look at Gilmore Field in just a minute. It was 1957 that they stopped playing baseball at Gilmore Field, and that, of course, was because of the announcement that the Dodgers were coming to town. And quickly, the next year, in 1958, it was leveled. But let's take a look at a couple of photos of old Gilmore Field. Gilmore Field, home of the Hollywood Stars, hosted Pacific Coast League baseball for more than 30 years. Not a great field, but it saw a lot of great games. It was torn down in 1957 and replaced by CBS Studios. Gilmore Field and the Hollywood Stars were owned by a guy named Bob Cobb, who also owned the very famous Brown Derby restaurant, actually restaurants in Los Angeles. And in addition to owning the Brown Derby, Bob Cobb is famous for one other thing. He created the Cobb salad. Yes, indeed. Oh, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. We were talking about baseball cards and suddenly I ended up talking about Cobb salad. Let's get back to the PCL specifically. I want to talk to you about the great rivalry there was between the Hollywood Stars and the Los Angeles Angels, and specifically two big fights those teams got into. They were always getting into fights. The Hollywood fans hated the Angels, and the Angels fans, they hated the Stars. Everybody hated each other. And like cowboys who thought the town wasn't big enough for both of them, this rivalry between these two clubs wasn't confined to the fans. The players, they didn't like each other either. There were frequent incidents on the playing field, which culminated in a game in 1953. The fireworks broke out during the first game of a Sunday doubleheader before what was an overflow crowd. The first batter, Frank Kelleher, was hit by a pitch from an Angel pitcher. He charged the mound and he wrestled, the batter did, who got hit, wrestled the pitcher to the ground. Both benches naturally emptied. Punches were thrown, players were ejected. The batter, who was a guy named Frank Kelleher, you remember, he got hit by the pitch, so he gets to take first base, but he was ejected from the game for fighting. Yeah, he charged the pitcher. So a guy named Ted Beard was the pinch runner at first base. The next Hollywood Star that was up, single to right. Ted Beard, the runner at first, took off, rounded second, went into third, and slid with his spikes flying and struck the Angel third baseman. And you know what happened from there? again, the benches emptied, all the players were on the field, and we had another big fight. Even the umpires got involved, and they couldn't stop the fight. It just kept going. The fans were screaming, and you know what they did? They had to call in the Los Angeles Police Department, a complete brigade of police officers. That would be 50 police officers had to come to the field and break up the fight. A few players were hurt, a lot of cuts and bruises. I think one or two got sent to the hospital. And this event made national news, and you even saw some of it displayed in magazines like Life magazine, which was very popular back in the 50s. Anyway, that was just one of two fights I want to tell you about. The next one involves some players that you know or should know. So, yeah, I'm talking about Spook Jacobs. Spook was playing for the Stars at the time, and they had a big game against, of course, the Angels. And Spook had the misfortune of being the leadoff hitter. I think it was the 6th inning. The pitcher, who bats 9th, had just finished hitting. And in fact, he hit a 400-foot home run. This did not please the Los Angeles Angel pitcher at all. He was pretty fired up. That guy, you should know also, was a very mediocre pitcher in the 50s for the Brooklyn Dodgers. Did nothing remarkable, didn't stay too long, went back down to the minors, played for the Angels. And of course, I'm talking about Tommy Lasorda. He was so mad. The first pitch, he beaned Spook. And of course, that didn't please the Spook. So Spook Jacobs charged the mound, knocked Tommy Lasorda down, and a big fight. The infielders came in, and Spook got the best of it. And soon as he finished with Tom Lasorda, who, by the way, you probably know, became the Los Angeles Dodger manager. Never a great player, great manager. He made the Hall of Fame. Anyway, Spook Jacobs takes on the Hollywood Star second baseman, an extremely mediocre player who only played 1 year in the majors, and he's back in the minors. That guy was named George Anderson. George Sparky Anderson. Also, mediocre to poor player who later became a manager, and because he did such a great job there, he's in the Hall of Fame. Anyway, Spook Jacobs got in a big fight with him. And that was it. But it goes to show you how much these two teams hated each other and got in so many fights. So, all right, I think I'm done with the fights now. I'm going to finish up now with my two favorite players in the PCL. One, a Los Angeles Angel, and the other is a Hollywood Star. And no, I'm not talking about Spook Jacobs. Let's leave Spook Jacobs for the time being, okay, and go on to something else. Goodbye, Spook. Next, I want to talk to all of you about my favorite minor league player. There's two of them, and I'm going to talk about my favorite first. This guy played, of course, for the Los Angeles Angels in the PCL. And during the 1956 baseball season in the city of Los Angeles, Mickey Mantle's pursuit of Babe Ruth's single-season home run record in the majors was matched only by the day-to-day drama of Steve Bilko's exploits in the Pacific Coast League. While Mantle was winning the Triple Crown in the American League in 1956, Bilko was doing the very same thing for the Los Angeles Angels in the PCL. he won not only the Triple Crown, but he also won Minor League Player of the Year. He led the league hitters in 8 separate categories. Bilko put forth one of the greatest single-season performances in the history of the PCL. He anchored the Angel lineup and led them to the pennant. And of course, he was the most valuable player in the series and also in the entire season. In fact, he was the Minor League Player of the Year for the entire country. He had a batting average of .360. And how many home runs did he hit? 55. He got 164 runs batted in. And he did great the next year, too. He had 3 terrific seasons for the Los Angeles Angels. Bilko was signed when he was pretty young. He was pretty well thought of. He was signed by the St. Louis Cardinals. And he came up in 1952, broke into the starting lineup in 1953. He had 2 good years for the Cardinals. Batted cleanup right between Hall of Famer Stan Musial and the other guy was outfielder Enos Slaughter. 3rd year, so-so, and the Cardinals traded him. They traded him to the Chicago Cubs. He played only 1 year there. Really had an okay season, nothing great though. The following year, he was traded to the Chicago Cubs minor league team, which of course was the Pacific Coast Los Angeles Angels. And Bilko went on to have 3 fabulous seasons with the Angels. After that, he did go back up to the majors. In fact, trivia question for you guys. Who was the first player ever to play for both the Major League Los Angeles Dodgers and the American League Anaheim Angels, California Angels? That's what they were called at the time. Yeah, that would be Steve Bilko. Steve Bilko was huge in Southern California in 1956. His manager said he was bigger than Marilyn Monroe, and that's saying something. Steve Bilko died at a really young age. He died at 50. And in 2003, he was inducted into the PCL Hall of Fame, along with a number of other terrific players. Anyway, Steve Bilko, my favorite minor league player. Next up, a guy actually I really didn't like, but I got to like him later when I got to know him a little better, know a little bit more about him. I never met him, obviously, but one of the reasons I didn't like him, he played for the Hollywood Stars. So let's take a look at this guy. Carlos Eugene Bernier Rodriguez, commonly known as Carlos Bernier. He was a Puerto Rican professional baseball player, an outfielder who played 1 full season only of Major League Baseball for the 1953 Pittsburgh Pirates. However, he had 16 very successful years as a minor leaguer. Look up Carlos Bernier on baseballreference.com or in most any encyclopedia, and you'll only find the briefest of entries, such as this one. In addition, look at ESPN and what they have to say about Carlos Bernier. No information available. 1 season, that's it. We see that he was 26 years old and played primarily center field for a miserable 150, lost 104, last place Pittsburgh Pirate team. It's obvious that he had serious speed. We can see that he walked a lot, struck out a lot, and generally didn't hit that much. So, what is one to conclude from this tiny snippet of a career? It would seem that Bernier was a guy with a good set of wheels, but maybe not much else. He knocked around the minors for a while, then came up finally at the age of 26 to the major leagues with the Pittsburgh Pirates, a really bad team. He didn't impress anybody, and then he disappeared into minor league oblivion. To some extent, that summary would be accurate, but it would be, oh, so inadequate in really describing Carlos Bernier or his career. In fact, Bernier was a very good player who enjoyed a very long and highly accomplished professional career in the U.S. and in Puerto Rico. The career of Carlos Bernier is in fact very intertwined with many of the most interesting and complicated issues of mid-century professional baseball, those being immigration, racism, and the relationship between the minor leagues and the major leagues in the 1950s and the 1960s. So let's look beyond the Major League Baseball only one season career of Carlos Bernier and try to learn something else about him. There was one thing that was certain about Bernier, and that is he was a pioneer. He was one of the handful of black players in organized baseball in 1948. Bernier started his minor league career in the U.S. in 1949. And during the 49, 50, and 51 season in the minors, Carlos tore up the league. He was averaging over 300 batting average at the plate. He was stealing in excess of 50 bases every year. He led the league in triples, and he was hitting about 24, 25 home runs a year. That's 49, 50, and 51. So that, he finally gained some recognition, and he got promoted to the AAA best minor league in the nation. That, of course, was the Pacific Coast League. Carlos Bernier, 1952, went to the Hollywood Stars, where he continued to do terrific. Really fast base runner. He stole 60-some bases that first year in 1952 with the Stars, hit over 20 home runs, and batted over 300. So this performance with the Hollywood Stars and the PCL earned Carlos Bernier a chance to play with the Pittsburgh Pirates in 1953, which he did. Unfortunately, he had a very undistinguished year. Although he was still young, he had a lot of promise, he could steal bases, he was a really good fielder, and he could hit for average. Although in 53, he didn't play a full season, but he only hit .213. He was sent back to the minors, back to the Hollywood Stars. Now, here is where the story gets perplexing. Carlos Bernier was sent down to the minors after his 1953 season with the Pirates. He never came back to the majors. This is perplexing because the Pirates were run by a general manager named Branch Rickey. And you may recall Branch Rickey was previously the general manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers, and he was the person responsible for bringing Jackie Robinson into baseball. So why did Carlos Bernier, who was actually half black, half Hispanic, why didn't he get a second chance? The Pirates were not a great team. The players that played in the outfield in 54, 55, 56 were frankly pretty bad. Meanwhile, Carlos Bernier was tearing up the PCL playing for the Hollywood Stars. getting hits, stealing bases, hitting for a high average, and fielding well. Why? The Pittsburgh Pirates had a youth movement, and that was smart. They were patient with their players. They got second, third, fourth chances. These are young guys, young kids. Carlos Bernier, he never got that chance. What happened? Well, Carlos Bernier's son, who became a doctor, had this to say about his father. He lived in an era when it was fashionable to discriminate. In fact, many states upheld laws that discriminated against people of color. My father's only shortfall was that he did not handle the injustices of society with the same grace as a Jackie Robinson or a Roberto Clemente. He was quite angry at the injustices and faced them head on, even if it meant challenging a white major league umpire who made a racial slur. I have often wondered how different life would have been for him with all of his talents if he had played now instead of then. His career would have been spent primarily in the majors rather than the minors. Fans must understand that he did not leave the major leagues because he did not have the talent to be there. He did not remain in the majors because he could not tolerate the injustices of a country where it was still acceptable to hang people of color for drinking out of fountains designated for whites only. In the Pacific Coast League, he did not have to confront the challenges he had to confront in Pittsburgh. Indeed, Bernier developed a reputation for feistiveness that undoubtedly made major league teams and owners leery about bringing him up or promoting him in any fashion. And to whatever degree he deserved it, Bernier became known as a competitive player and a combative player. And it's only accurate to say in the 1950s and the 1960s, the chances of a Latino black man being called up to the majors was not so great if, number one, he wasn't so young anymore, two, he had done poorly in his only major league season, and three, he had a reputation for aggressiveness. In 1954, Carlos Bernier was in the PCL, and he got in an argument with an umpire, and he actually hit the umpire. And he was suspended for the rest of the season. Newspaper headlines were Bernier hits umpire, Negro Coast league star banned for season, things like that. But you have to keep in mind that after that, Bernier was a career minor league leaguer, and in that period, which was the very end of an era in which there were such things as career minor league stars, he became a highly accomplished minor league star. Bernier led the PCL in numerous categories throughout his career in the PCL, and included stolen bases, triples, batting average, runs scored, on-base percentage, etc., etc. All in all, to see Carlos Bernier's career as a 213 one-liner is to see it all wrong. That forlorn one season that he had with the Pittsburgh Pirates does indicate brevity and failure. But his career was, in fact, quite the opposite. His career was remarkable. He led so many of his teams to championships, and he was usually the key reason they made it that far. One final thing about Carlos Bernier. Carlos Bernier ended the Pittsburgh Pirates era of racial segregation when he played for them in 1953. Remember, he was half Puerto Rican and half black, but neither the Pittsburgh Pirates nor Major League Baseball have ever recognized Carlos Bernier as being the person who broke the color barrier for the Pittsburgh Pirates in 1953. This is true even though several other half black, half Hispanic players are recognized as breaking the color barrier. And I'll show you a few right now. Take a look at these four guys. In the upper left-hand corner is a guy named Minnie Minoso, played many years for the Chicago White Sox, half black, half Cuban. He was a terrific player. Lower left, Carlos Paula for the Washington Senators. He was half Hispanic, half black. Lower right is Ozzie Virgil. He played for the Tigers, very good infielder. He was half Hispanic, half black. And in the upper right corner, actually a guy I'm not all that familiar with, but he played for the Cincinnati Reds, and his name was Nino Escalera. Actually never had heard of him before, but he also was half black, half Hispanic. So why did the Pirates and Major League Baseball not recognize Carlos Bernier as the guy who broke the color barrier for the Pittsburgh Pirates? It's still being talked about today and debated. So even though Carlos Bernier has been long dead, he survives insofar as people are still talking about what happened in this regard. He should be known as the person who broke the color barrier. So, Carlos Bernier retired in Puerto Rico, eventually ran out of money and had some poor health. And at the relatively young age of 54, he committed suicide by hanging himself in his garage. Pretty sad. But the people that knew him thought a great deal of him, and I'm going to read for you just a quote from his son, what he had to say about his dad. It's like this. Despite his extremely competitive demeanor on the field, my dad was a gentle soul off the field with the greatest qualities: kindness, compassionate, generous, responsible, and loving. Many people don't know what a wonderful person he was because they only witnessed his exploits and his aggressive style of play on the field. So that's all on Carlos Bernier. Finishing perhaps on a little bit of a higher note, Spook Jacobs, who was in the minor leagues for many years, retired, and he bought a donut shop, and he lived happily ever after. Spook Jacobs. Okay, guys, I'm done. Thanks for listening this long. This was much longer than I anticipated. I apologize for that. I am going to do another one of these where I'm really going to stick to the players and the cards and not have such a long dissertation on things like I've done here. So again, hey, thanks for watching this. Bye for now.